Hello folk, how you doing? Scotty. So I was recently requested to respond on a particular individual, and he's basically making this argument against capitalism. It's this reference to today's economy.
Changed my view on this whole system and realizing that we're probably not going to be able to make the system good enough to ever really work.
He's basically saying that he initially supported today's economy and now he feels that this is problematic. Now this is going to go down the road of the predictable. The predictable, no doubt, of blaming capitalism for today's problems and then thinking that mere socialism is somehow the solution to the problems.
I said capitalism exists solely to extract labor, centralize power again, and perpetuate itself.
And this is what the people who are ill-informed about capitalism are very good at. They're very good at making baseless claims, asserting as if it's based on fact. When people don't have the information, they don't have the knowledge of history and economics, they just buy into that. He says about centralisation of power. That's got nothing at all to do with capitalism. Capitalism is the separation of the economy from government. In other words, it's decentralisation. And the myths of monopolies and oligopolies and cartels under a free market system is just that. It's a myth. It requires through socialist government interventionism that gives rise to these things. It's not just a problem with Marxists. You get a problem within even the conservative movement. You look at them in the comments section, literally, and these are supposed to be so-called free market movements, right? Take for example Turning Point USA. You find in the comments section it's all these so-called conservatives, and they're basically claiming that somehow they need government legislation. They need, the likes of the antitrust law legislation to come and save the day. Most of these so-called conservatives themselves don't even have a clue. They actually think government's the solution to their problems, when government was actually the cause of the problems.
We don't need jobs naturally. We need jobs because resources are locked and controlled. Basically, so you're going to starve if you don't get that.
Really all it is down to, when it comes to capitalism, resources are decentralised. The free and voluntary exchange, because both benefit from such an exchange. In other words, you may have something that someone else doesn't, and someone else may have something that you don't have, and therefore you come to an agreement of exchange. The way he would like to try and paint things is almost as if to say, well, they would just hog everything, they would turn into a monopoly, and they would just drive the prices up to shaft the consumer. You can see where this is going.
Capitalism is a long-winded way to bring back effective slavery and pacifies us using Disney, Netflix, and social media.
For anybody to try and call it slavery, for you to go through a job application process and even go through a job interview, that doesn't make rational sense. You have to go through an interview process. If it was slavery, there wouldn't be such a process. You'd be forced into it. But their argument is so infantile. They're saying that, well, capitalism's slavery because you have to work for a living. That's the real world of economics, no matter what system you've got. After all, how the hell do you think farmers produce food? How the hell do you think your food reaches the shelves of your local supermarkets? Their infantile worldview is that, oh well, because you have to work for a living, that must be slavery.
Until corporations who own the government can do it completely with force and propaganda again.
You had to go through corporatism first in order to reach there. And in order to reach that position, you needed government intervention in the economy. Capitalism's got nothing at all to do with collectivism. Fascism is a collectivist system, and the economic element of fascism is corporatism. Capitalism's an individualist system. Individualism defines the free market. And this is the thing, because they might even turn around and say to you, well, capitalism's the early stages of corporatism, which proves to you they don't even have a clue about A, history, and B, economics. I mean, it was very, very clear from history what led to corporatism. It most certainly wasn't anything at all to do with a market being left free. But even if we go down the road of that argument, of what he's trying to claim there, what's his solution? Is his solution going down the road of mere socialism? Well, given the fact that money only comes from two places, the private sector taxpayer or the printing press, get rid of the private sector that finances your economy and run the printing press to drive us into hyperinflation. Go towards a moneyless based economy. Because what that would prove is that these people don't understand monetary history. And you know that for a fact, because the whole reason for why money came around in the first place, for why money came to existence, was purely because it was something that happened naturally. It was an improvement to that of fixing a problem that was with this barter system. And this is exactly what I mean. These people don't really have any concept of the world and how things work. They don't even understand prices. They couldn't even tell you the importance of profits and losses. But here he is to tell you that somehow capitalism's the cause of all your problems, etc.
As the military gets stronger, as we become more connected, and the people in power have more control over us, they can see where we're going with our cell phones, they can extract our metadata and see how we're making decisions.
Yeah, you see all this stuff, folk, is through government's intervention, basically through their socialism. I mean, how the hell do you think you go from capitalism, right? How the hell do you think you go from a free market to that of the mixed economy? What is a mixed economy? It's the mixture between capitalism and socialism. Perhaps you would say capitalism's been strangled half to death through all the socialist government interventionism. So in other words, you're not living under a free market economy. But in order for you to move from a free market towards the mixed economy, you had to introduce socialism more and more into the economy. All of that caused through government's intervention, and there he is, try to correlate and blame that off into capitalism. That's a bit like the picture of the bicycle. Boy sticks the stick between the spokes of the front wheel and ends up going over the handlebars and then blames the bike for it. That's essentially what he's doing. He's basically creating a problem through government's intervention, supporting more government intervention, and then blaming capitalism for it.
And just use that to control us to continue pushing wealth upwards. And because we have two right-wing parties, one right-wing party that strongly pushes to the right, and the other right-wing party that doesn't ever push back in the other direction, and also occasionally also moves to the right. So we'll bounce back and forth. It'll be a hard right push, and then maybe we'll get like one almost leftist thing, but then it'll be a hard right push. There's no going.
First and foremost, I don't even know where he's getting this idea from that the United States government has been anything of what he would classify as so-called right-wing. This is the thing, see if you were to go down to the whole left versus right, you're talking about reducing the size and the power of the state, you're talking about deregulation. They were the same kind of people who ran around telling you that deregulation caused the banking crisis, or they says the unregulated markets caused the crisis, even although, like I've pointed out a billion times before, the private sector is all regulated by the state. Not just in the United States of America, but here in Great Britain as well. He is basically trying to paint this off as basically, oh well, it's all right wing, and that somehow the Democrats and the Republicans have somehow been behaving as, strongly capitalist or something like that. All the minimum wage laws that we've been seeing, the attempts of the $15 minimum wage, etc. And I've seen no attempt whatsoever to properly get rid of that main American healthcare market, to move towards a free market. I've not seen that. As far as I'm concerned, the Republican Party is just overrun by what you call neocons, as Americans call them. A neocon most certainly is nothing at all to do with that of a true conservative. A true conservative is someone who supports the free market, not someone who supports big government and the nanny state and the warfare state and all the rest of it. And I'm not saying Donald Trump did. That is typically what makes up the Republican Party.
When we have two right-wing parties, so when people say the Democrats are fucking socialist or something, I think they're utterly insane.
So an ill-informed person who's no got a clue about economic history, is completely ignorant of politics, hasn't got a clue about economics whatsoever, wants to say that I'm insane for pointing out all the socialist pish, like the fixing of the interest rates, the fixing of the ratio, imposing a currency upon the market that the market didn't ask for, all the taxes that you've imposed, but as if by magic he wants to pretend to you, oh, that wasn't socialism, so what the bloody hell was it then? Because capitalism's not anything at all to do with fixing interest rates, etc. Capitalism is about leaving it down to the laws of supply and demand. So yes, welcome to the mixed economy. You do have socialism. It was socialism that tore the backside out the likes of California, and you can look at the state of Detroit today. It's like a ghost town, simply because of what socialist policies had caused over so many decades. But here he is, the ill-informed who basically wants to call people like me insane.
I think it's sad because not a whole lot of people realize that when you give the vast majority of your labor value upwards because the companies are setting the amount of money we're able to get paid. We have like a minimum wage of $7.25, and only because it's been that low for so long.
Seems to think that they can control prices at free will and control them above or below market value. That includes the minimum wage. The only people who support price controls, in any extent, to any level, people who have never studied economics, or people who don't understand the consequences of such actions. Now, I don't need to go into the whole thing and why the minimum wage just does not work, and it never has worked, and it never will work, because even Second Thought was forced into a concession. One of his own videos, of course, he conceded by saying, inflation kept on wiping it out. Well, that's no bloody well surprise. Despite the fact that inflation keeps driving up and keeps on wiping it out, you seem to think the solution is to continue on doing the same thing over and expecting different results. You would think with common sense that you would try and fix the inflationary problem itself. And given the very fact that inflation is a largely monetary phenomenon, you would think that you would actually fix that problem. Stop running the printing press, abolish the central banking system, move back to free market money and banking, finance the economy off the back of a strong private sector. This is the idea where he complains about such problems, the cost of living, etc. Well, what the bloody hell do you expect?
Wages were so low that people needed something more, so they're kind of pushing upward a little bit, but it's not nearly to where it will be, but your labor is just going to get devalued over time.
This is the whole idea that they've got, where they think that value itself is determined down to labour. It held, some credence at the time, but of course the subjective theory of value would overtake it. That is the marginal utility theory. Value is something subjective. At the end of the day, laws of supply and demand do play a big part in it. It's one thing, and you see it so often, you see it even from a lot of these people who are not even claimed to be Marxists, etc. They don't understand why these football players and whatever have you end up getting paid thousands and thousands and thousands, yet a teacher doesn't. The answer's quite simple. If you look at someone, I don't know, some top footballer like that of Cristiano Ronaldo or something like that, and then you compare that to teachers, and you might think from the moral point of view, well, teachers should get paid the same or get paid more than them because that's just from the moral perspective, they're doing a more important job. But the teachers are easily replaceable. This is the point that these people don't understand. In other words, those teachers are in high supply, and there's countless many even chasing after their job, then of course the value of their labour is nowhere near the same as a Lionel Messi. Why is that? Because there is only one Lionel Messi, that's why. Welcome to the laws of supply and demand.
Here's what happens every time we have a crisis. Take 9/11 for example. All of a sudden it's now we're going to be able to control people at airports more. We're going to be able to do more spying and get away with it. We're going to be able to go to war and go, bomb Iraq and Afghanistan and take the resources because it's a panic and no one's thinking in a panic.
This is where he goes on about bombing other countries, taking resources, etc. That's got nothing to do with capitalism. You see, before the Industrial Revolution, how the world got around to taking things and that was through plunder. In other words, kind of like the way the Vikings did. I don't know if you would call it the invention of the free market, but the beauty of the capitalist system was it created something for the first time in history. It would not only create harmony, it would create a system that enabled people to lift the masses out of poverty, voluntarily exchange with one another, right, through what we call free trade, right? That's what capitalism's all about. Capitalism is not about protectionist tariffs. Capitalism is not about invading another country through the use of government. After all, it's government that creates the wars, and then of course taking another country's resources through imperialism or colonialism. And this is exactly it, because this type of person is the type of erroneous individual who would go as far as to try and connect a collectivist ideology, imperialism or colonialism, and then try to connect that to an individualist system known as capitalism, even although they're two complete opposites.
Who gets to choose that? Supposedly we have freedom of speech, but you'll see if there's things that'll actually have a chance of hurting the power structure or changing things. Like, I'm not even saying I'm like 100% behind this, but stuff like BLM and other various movements we've had over these last 2 years of craziness, those have been like quickly swatted down by like the fucking police.
I'm not bloody well surprised why action was taken against a bunch of hooligans. They had nothing at all to do with black people. In fact, there's countless many black people who came out and against them, and rightly so, because I don't view them as black people. Right? I just don't. I view BLM as nothing other than just the rest of them. Just the rest are socialists, right? That's all they are. Socialists. A socialist is basically an economic terrorist. That's essentially what a socialist is. How's a socialist not an economic terrorist? They basically went around, to people's own private property, what they worked hard for, and burned and looted their private companies. But you don't even bother to do your own independent research to see what the problem is. It's not the problem because, oh look, there's private companies, as if it's that simple. And it's not as simple as saying, oh look, there's big businesses, therefore there's the problem. The problem's the corporatist system. You would have to understand what that is to begin with. But people like yourself really don't understand anything at all to do with that.
Little thing of capitalism is, it's this kind of, this myth that we can postpone death, or that death isn't real, that just by owning as many things as possible, that's how you're going to be successful.
Capitalism is not about, oh, let's just own everything we possibly can. It's all about individual free choice. In other words, in a capitalist system, under a free market economy, buy a lot of stuff or you just simply don't. Whether you wish to live a simple life, that's your free choice. You don't comprehend that if it's not for capitalism, you wouldn't get freedom. Anybody that laughably thinks that they can live an economic, independent, free life in the absence of a capitalist system have clearly never touched an economics textbook in their life and have never lived in the likes of the Soviet Union or anywhere like that in their life.
At some point, it's almost like I remember this. Probably my favorite game, or one of my favorite games of all time, Catherine. You go in this nightmare world every night, and there's like cheating men in there who like manifest as sheep, and they have to climb this tower so they can survive, and if they fall in the dream, they die. And there's this one really kind of fat sheep who's just collecting all this money, and he's like, if I just collect enough money, eventually I'll be able to buy my way out of here. He's very capitalistic, and he just keeps doing that, and then once he gets to a certain point, he has too much money, and he falls off the tower and dies because he's trying to pull up all this money with him, and the sheep says he looks like a shooting star with all the shining coins. It's just like a moment I thought was very kind of amusing, because that's what I feel like people think in America. They think like, oh, if I get enough money, because we've basically been trained to think that money and status is the only thing that matters.
That's because these games are more often than not produced by the very people who are anti-capitalist. And I'm a very, very big fan of the Assassin's Creed series. I've recently played the likes of Origins, Valhalla, and even my favourite, Odyssey. There was one particular, and again it's one of my other favourites, and that was the Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Lo and behold, Assassin's Creed Syndicate paints this image as if the capitalist factory owners were these evil exploiters that you need to overthrow from, the factory, and they would beat the children and all the rest of this. And it went along with the mainstream propaganda, and people like you believed it. And although it does mention at the start about fiction to a varying extent, they don't really see that as fiction. They actually think that's what the Industrial Revolution was like, unfortunately. Sadly, they do. I'm not saying all of them do, but a good many, and I'm not just, picking on them, I'm saying there's a lot of people out there that believe all that propaganda. This example of a game that you're given doesn't mean anything to me. The image that they paint of capitalism is false. Just look at the myth of the robber barons. And again, it doesn't just come from the likes of, the average socialist. Unfortunately, it comes from good people like that of Dan Bongino.
When I think the things that should matter is having a good life, being in a community, living like our ancestors did, having a community of people who care and take care of each other. That is the most satisfying thing.
Life before the Industrial Revolution was not as fanciful as what you're trying to make it out to be. I don't know why you would seem to think or seem to believe by any stretch of the imagination that those people in the so-called communities were living such a great life, given the very fact there was periodical famines for centuries. The life expectancy of a child was the average about the age of 9, and the adults the age of 40. Life was terrible.
And if you've never really experienced that before, of like being in nature, of like exercising, going out to do stuff, and like being connected in a community, like I'm slowly building my own community, that is so much more satisfying. But capitalism makes it so hard to do that. People go to college, then they get jobs and move away so they can make more money. The people you spent 18 years of your life with, you just leave their house one day and like almost never see them again. It's like, what was the point of all that?
Well, first and foremost, the very reason why they're being forced to leave behind where they are for work elsewhere is because your socialism created the problem, where your socialism, through all the intervention, destroyed the job market, made jobs few and far between, strangled people half to death, and forced them into a position where if they do get a career or whatever it is, they're forced to leave behind because they've got no other choice. Somehow you seem to think that socialism's going to solve that problem. Well, why don't you go and live in Venezuela then and ask them how life is? Each and every single day, you'd be left in a massive big queue waiting for crumbs left on the shelves. Because that's the true face of what socialism really is. And, if it wasn't for capitalism, even, moving towards this mixed economy, it was thanks to capitalism that greatly reduced your work week hours.
America is going very, very badly. And people are basically I don't know if this is a word, but propagandized, I'm going to use it anyways, to think like shit like socialism is bad and the Democrats are actually helping us and they're not another right-wing party. Like, even like Republicans, like people who are right-wing, like think the Democrats are left. Like, they're only left relative to your own party, or relative to the rest of the developed world that has universal health care and way more socialism. And when I say socialism here, I basically mean when like capitalism has like public programs to like help people.
Many of the people who claim that socialism's bad, they couldn't really tell you what socialism is and why it fails. I see a lot of people who claim to be so anti-socialist, and they contradict themselves by supporting things that are very much socialist in many regards. With the mess things are in the United States of America, yes, socialism is bad. I mean, what the hell are you thinking? Do you honestly believe that, and it's bad enough as it is with your private sector over-regulated by the state, but do you honestly think that the solution to your problems today is to begin heavy nationalisation? Then what are you going to do? How are you going to pay for that? Are you going to start running the printing press to an extreme level? It's already bad enough as it is. How then are you going to combat inflation? Because that's essentially what would happen, because you've got no other way to pay for socialism. The only thing that you're left with is to then set down price ceilings. Price shortage problems that you see throughout history with socialism each and every single time. Don't even start me with universal healthcare. The British NHS has been an abysmal failure since 1948. Each and every single passing decade, each decade you'll see the long waiting lines, the staff shortage problems, the hospital bed shortage problems that existed decade after decade after decade. And despite the abysmal failure, the cultists prop it up as the greatest healthcare system in the world when it's anything but. And you are probably not even aware of the very fact you have two healthcare systems. The other healthcare systems got nothing at all to do with the main American healthcare market. What's the bet you didn't even know direct primary care existed? People like you are so ill-informed, you think that the main American healthcare market's free market when it isn't. Yeah, the public sector, the very public sector that is financed by the private sector. And where's the money going to come from to pay for your massive big bloating public sector? And this is the issue, because you don't even understand the economic calculation problem. The public services here in Britain have been an abysmal failure. The very reason why Royal Mail faced bankruptcy. It was the very reason why the railways was facing privatisation eventually, because British Rail was an abysmal failure. You forget that fact. We faced the history of that heavy nationalisation. Privatisation didn't come around for nothing. But what you don't understand is the very fact we did not have true private ownership. There's a colossal difference. That's the problem. All the government intervention, the incompetence that it's resulted in. You could even look at all the government subsidies in the late 19th century, all the bankruptcy that happened in the private sector because of government subsidies. I don't need to go into that, I've covered that in videos before, but that's the point. And I think I've covered enough on this particular individual, folk. You know, it's the same repetitive arguments where it's just a case of they go on about the cost of living, they blame capitalism for today's problems, they start going on about how you need the universal healthcare and all the rest of this pish. It's the same thing. It's the same arguments or and or and or. They don't understand that the United States of America today is not living under a free market system. It's not living under a capitalist system. And there is only capitalism. There is no other capitalism. Capitalism's an individualist system. You're not living under individualism. You're living under a mixed economy. And that's really all there is to it. So, anyway, folk, I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add in yourself for that. You know, feel free to comment in the comment section below. But, you know, I just watched that, you know, parts of that video there. It's the first time, and what can I say? It's the same repetitive nonsense you hear all and all, and they don't seem to take the hint. And that they're idealistic. They live in a theoretical fantasy world based on socialism, where they seem to think that they can place their theory above practice, and it just isn't the real world, and that's the problem. Anyway, folk, thank you for watching my video, and of course, I shall talk to you later. Cheers.